Okay, welcome back. Now we have panel 2. And I'd like to welcome Tabitha Morgan. She was the BBC's Cyprus correspondent for 12 years between 1999 and 2007. During that time, she also wrote and directed films in the United Nations, including a dramatised documentary, The Nine, set in a post-solution Cyprus of the future. She is the author of Sweet and Bitter Island, A History of the British and Cyprus, which has been translated in Turkish and, here's a plug, is due to be republished in paperback by IB Tauris next February. Give the money later.
Am I right in thinking we're to stand here? Or, yeah. Nick has very kindly offered to do some improvised visual aids. I didn't realise that we had the opportunity of PowerPoint, otherwise I'd have prepared a proper slideshow. But he's showing you now a picture of the lady that I want to talk about. I hope this isn't going to be too esoteric. I did think about talking about Hands Across the Divide, which was an organisation I was a member of for a while, and which I think does really, really important work. But I hesitated because I haven't been in Cyprus now for 4 years, so I felt a little bit out of the loop there. So, I'm going to talk about Gladys Peto, a British woman who was a woman of Cyprus for just 3 short years during the 1920s. She was best known as an artist, and her writing was almost an adjunct to her work as an artist and a designer. That's what she was best known as. The reason I think her writing is worth attention is because it's quite different from the texts left by most other women travellers to Cyprus. She has a highly sophisticated narrative voice, and she employs, as I hope I'll be able to show you, virtually every literary convention available in an attempt to reconcile the tensions inherent in her position as a woman writing about the British colonial experience. She was, as I said, a hugely successful artist and an illustrator of children's books. A lot of her illustrations appeared on ceramics at the time, and I interviewed a very old lady some years ago who said that the thing to have in the 1930s, if you were a stylish woman about town, was a Gladys Peto dress. She did these very geometrical, brightly coloured designs on fabric, but the Gladys Peto dress was the thing to have. But of course, who's heard of her now? Pretty much totally forgotten. She spent 3 years in Cyprus when her husband, a chap called Cuthbert Emerson, who was in the Army Medical Corps, was posted there. And her book, Malta and Cyprus, was published by, if we can just see, that's the frontispiece for Malta and Cyprus. That's one of her black and white plates for the book. It was published by the Outward Bound Library in 1927, and the frontispiece says it was one of a series of, quote, illustrated handbooks for the information and entertainment of travellers and emigrants and their friends at home. And there are several things that I think are interesting and significant about her writing. Firstly, it's a critique of British colonial society. Expatriate society in Cyprus was, as elsewhere, fraught with class anxiety. And this wasn't just about the little individual worries of individual colonial civil servants who might be socially aspirant. It was something that was central to the imperial project, how Europeans imagined and constructed their identities in the colonies and then used those constructs to cultivate distinctions between themselves and those that they ruled. This was central to the ideology of empire, and it's something that Peto observed with a certain ironic detachment. This is some of her writing from the time she was in Cyprus. Even if you only have 4 quite intimate friends to dinner whom you call by their first names and see twice or 3 times every day, you must still be extremely careful to consider the proper precedence in your seating arrangements for a dinner party. Otherwise, someone will be extremely affronted and will call the next day to explain your mistake. In the same vein, she describes the celebrations for the king's birthday, highlighting and obviously enjoying the contradictions that existed between the colonists' public and private selves. Upon the 3rd of June, the King's birthday, all kinds of grand doings take place, at which you may see your friends, the District Commissioner and the Judge, decked out in top hats and so forth. In the afternoon, the District Commissioner and his wife give a grand tea party. You shake hands politely in the hall with the lady whom you see every day, and whom you usually address as Dorothy, commend the excellent playing of the band, and go away in search of a ceremonial cup of tea. On the table you will see roses from your own garden, which you arranged yourself that morning, and accept an elegant slice of cake from your own wedding present cake stand. Pito's writing is a particularly striking example of what's sometimes called sentimental or experiential travel writing. And that's basically writing that follows the conventions of what we would recognise as travel writing today. Experiential accounts in which the narrator is placed firmly within the centre of the narrative. There's an American academic called Mary Louise Pratt who characterised this kind of writing, saying it expressed multivalence, confusion, self-doubt, and self-parody. And Pito's writing illustrates every one of those characteristics, sometimes in the space of a single paragraph. She certainly employs a bewildering range of linguistic strategies to negotiate her way through the complexities of being a British woman writing about her experience of colonial life in the 1920s. Pratt helps to explain why writing like Pito's has, almost by definition, got to have so much going on. It's got to be so busy. She provides a rather elegant deconstruction of the processes at work in experiential travel writing, and it's this. The self sees, it sees itself seeing, it sees itself being seen. It's complicated. There's a lot happening. Gladys Pito, the narrator, located within the text, observes Cyprus and its inhabitants. Then we've got the second self, Pito the real person, the author, who sees Pito the narrator seeing. And then lastly, we have another layer, when both these selves observe Pito the narrator being the object of external scrutiny. And it doesn't end there. That external scrutiny, the reciprocal gaze, comes not just from the colonial subjects, which is what happens in conventional travel writing. Because of Pito's position as a woman, and one who wasn't travelling through Cyprus, but was firmly embedded within its colonial society, she's also subject to the piercing gaze of her fellow colonists, people who she no doubt hoped at some stage would go on to read the book she was writing about them. Blimey. With all the weight of these expectations on her shoulders, it's a wonder that the poor woman managed to pick up a pen at all.
Yeah.
And it's possible, in fact, that she did only feel able to do this because she was already so well established in another field, that of illustrating, writing, designing. Paradoxically, though, the area where she's less successful, and she obviously feels much less comfortable when she was trying to do it, was when she attempted to write about Cypriots, ostensibly the subject of the book that she's writing in the first place. She makes some valiant and, I think, interesting attempts, as in the following description of a shopping trip. Nicosia and the other large towns each possess one magnificent provision shop where you may buy the dainties of every country, and where the proprietor will receive you himself, note the use of the word will, with a polite handshake, and call your attention to the newly opened barrel of caviar. Nice shop she goes to, eh? He will give you a chair and a glass of iced lemonade or chocolate according to the temperature. His sons and daughters and numerous skila will all come forth and converse with you. One of the main ideological functions of what's sometimes called manners and customs travel writing at around this time was the creation of what are known as topographically and culturally fixed identities. This kind of writing sought to generalise the particular, to make the historically specific into something timeless and given. In short, it tried to extrapolate from the writer's personal experience in order to universalise that experience and control and fix the other at a given place within the semantic and imperial hierarchies of the day. It's all about controlling, defining, ordering. Pito, in the bit I was just reading you, I think makes a stab at subverting this convention by her insistence on using the future tense. The proprietor will receive you. He will give you a chair. This is probably what indeed did happen to Gladys Peto when she visited certain shops in Nicosia in the mid-1920s. It's most likely that these shops were run by a company called Shepherd's. That's where most colonial women shopped for provisions, and it was in fact a big chain of stores that was run actually by a Lebanese family operating throughout the Levant. But my point is, it's self-evidently absurd to insist that this is always going to happen to every shopper for the rest of time. Of course it won't. Peto is parodying the homogenising tendencies of sentimental travel writing, and in so doing she's distancing herself from it. All those wills, this is what the proprietor will do, etc. Of course it's not invariably going to happen. It's interesting to compare Peto's attempts at parody, at these distancing techniques, with a diary extract written by a woman who was also living in Nicosia at the same time. She was called Vivian Hart Davis, and she was the wife of Charles Hart Davis. Now, he was the guy who read out the declaration in 1925 that Cyprus was becoming a colony after the war in Karnak Square. Hart Davis's writing is, I would say, a rather extreme example of another kind of travel writing. She creates a bizarre sort of topographical predeterminism in her description of the Cypriots she encountered in Nicosia. Okay, cop a load of this. They were mortally embedded in intrigue. It was the breath of life to them, the atmosphere full of it, the climate encouraged it, the heat of noon when everyone drowsed, and the sun turned the whole landscape white and glinting. Then the sitting outside the wine shops in the evenings, discussing endless ways and means. It's a quite extraordinary sentence, where the nameless, faceless subjects, in fact you might have noticed there are no subjects in that sentence, grammatically, become simple, ideologically constructed ciphers, extensions of the landscape and the weather. And okay, admittedly this was Hart Davis's private diary, it was never intended for public consumption in the way that Gladys Peto's writing was. But I think when you read something like that was written at the same time, you can see what a sophisticated writer Peto was and what she was trying to do, a critique of the colonial society. Sophisticated she may have been, and Cyprus and Malta contains a courageous and I think intelligent attempt to reconcile some of the tensions and contradictions inherent in her position, but it could only ever be partially successful. Gladys Peto was crippled by her awareness of both the limitations of the genre that she had adopted and of the huge restrictions that she was operating under as a woman writer within colonial society. There would have been virtually no prospect at all of Peto, an army officer's wife stationed in Cyprus in 1924, gaining any meaningful understanding of the complexities of Cypriot society. And she knew full well that she could only ever observe from a distance and record the surface of things, as in the following description of, excuse me Nora, a Cypriot peasantry. To the casual observer, the Cypriot peasant appears to spend the whole of his days travelling along the roads of the plains or the paths of the hillsides, driving before him a number of greatly bepanniered donkeys. However, he really has many other expectations. Now she's aware that this bucolic description of the donkeys and their driver is an inadequate attempt at representing the life of any Cypriot peasant. It's merely a picture postcard view. She has no greater insight, she can tell us no more than the casual observer. And so the sentence that follows stops abruptly. He really has many other expectations. She has no idea what they are. She recognises, and more importantly, she wants the reader to know that she recognises, and this gets back to the self that sees itself being seen, that the life of the peasantry was more complicated than the picture postcard can show, and that it's a life from which she is entirely excluded. And ultimately her voice fades away. So in that sense, as a travel narrative, it fails. Peto is silenced by her inability to reconcile these multiple tensions and contradictions. She can never really know or understand Cypriot society, and yet she refuses to write a book as other writers might have been tempted to do, based on speculation and conjecture. But by the same token, the book's value as a text for cultural historians increases with the realisation that Peto is an authentic and reliable witness when she's talking about what she knows. Malta and Cyprus, this so-called travel book, is primarily an ethnographic account, not of the manners and customs of Cyprus and the Cypriots, but of the complex structures that underpinned Peto's own British colonial society.
Thank you very much, Tabitha. I hope those descriptions of the dinner party have actually been decision in you when we have lunch afterwards.